One thing I loved about this thriller was the lack of it just wasn't overly graphic. We didn't see what happened in the scenes and the brutal murders or whatnot. So I'm curious to hear how you decided to really tame it down versus like how much graphicness you gave, because I think typically authors would have made it more brutal.
And the last thing you want is to re-traumatize somebody. And I think it really imprinted on me the idea that we can talk about sexual and physical violence without describing it, and without having to focus on the acts themselves. Um, what matters in the novel is the impact it has on someone's psyche. And so that's what I brought in the page. There is no draft where those scenes are more detailed. It was like a line in the sand I had. I just couldn't go there. I didn't want to. And I don't think they were needed. I don't think we needed physical details of what was happening.
Sorry, I was to say, I think you handled it really well because of how you wrote it. It makes it easy for me to recommend it to all readers. Because, like you said, it doesn't re-traumatize those that have had, been in sexual assault and such.
And I knew from the onset I didn't want Aiden to speak. There are a couple reasons. There's one silly reason and one serious one. The silly one is if you've listened to interview tapes of serial killers, maybe on the FBI's YouTube channel, where I've spent a little bit of time. Um, Serial killers are not very interesting to listen to. Those tapes, you expect them to be like so tense and so full of revelations and so arresting. And very, very often they're very convoluted. The discussions kind of go in circles. The killers don't want to talk. They are obfuscating. They're lying. They have weird, like, bits of shame. That means they also lie to themselves. They don't want to talk about the things you want them to talk about. So I wasn't sure that a serial killer would be the best narrator to talk about themselves. But the more serious reason is that as a consumer of true crime, I was noticing that more and more podcasts and documentaries were trying to refocus our attention from being solely on the perpetrators and trying to look at the victims and the people around those perpetrators who also who are victims of their lies, of their duplicity, whose lives are suddenly shattered when they realize they've been living in a very different story than they thought. Um, and so telling that story through the eyes of those people, the victim, the love interest, and the daughter, to me felt more true and more holistic in a way. To me, there was a more real world perspective. And it's interesting because it's very obviously a female-led thriller, but they're all linked by this man who doesn't get to speak. Honestly, as a writer too. And it goes, by the way, saying like for just the alter getting out of May's perspective, also for me as a writer, and was like a huge relief. And I was like, oh, it's probably good then that I'm doing this for the readers because and I had a friend who read it and she told me something that I always remember. She said, May's perspective, it's very gripping, very dark. And then when you switch to Emily in that first chapter from Emily's perspective, she was like, it's like all the lights came on suddenly. And I was like, yeah. And it was nice to the Emily chapters were kind of fun to write for me because Emily doesn't know that the man she's crazy about as a serial killer, writing her chapters was almost like writing a romance at times, right? Like it was just she's having a good time for like the first third of the book, and and it was very good. It was a relief for me to get to write also scenes where people were having funny little dialogue and or well funny like just lighthearted dialogue on the surface and going to bars and working and having friends. I thought it was important. So not only the second person, it was nice to get a break from it because I don't think I would write a like 90,000 word novel all in the second person. But also just that change in perspective for me was a good change of pace.
Your writing process, I'd like to circle back a little bit to one of my favorite questions to ask authors is if you're a pantser or a plotter, as far as how you go about the structure of your writing.
I love this question because I have a very, very like strong answer to it. And whatever, like everyone's method works for them. Like there are people who love a detailed outline and that works for them. I can't outline. It just kills the process for me. It kills any desire I have to sit down with the story and work on it. So usually it's very like it's always the same thing. I know how something begins. I know going in how it's going to end. I don't know how I'm going to get there. And figuring out how I get there is half the fun. And I usually think of it as like if you're trying to walk in the dark and you have a flashlight that only shows you, 2 feet ahead, 5 feet ahead. And by the time you've crossed over those 5 feet, well, your flashlight is showing you 5 more feet. And et cetera, et cetera. So you go the whole way, but you never see it, until you get there.
Also, running parallel to what's happening there is Aiden goes to this restaurant where this woman works named Emily. Now, the whole Emily Aiden thing gave me the hella ick because Emily is very attracted to Aiden. And if you take Emily and Aiden's story by itself, it could read like a romance novel. If you didn't know that Aiden was cuckoo magoo, killing people, and has a woman locked in a bedroom in his house. So every time Emily would talk about how her feelings for him were growing and how she was attracted to him, and they actually do start developing a relationship and they do the thing, and just when they were like when it was describing the sex scene, I was so icked out because it was supposed to be, in any other context, it would be this sexy scene. But in the context of knowing who Aiden is, not so much. But yeah, the whole, like, when she sees the judge, and even, like, when she runs to the police station, why does nobody recognize her as May Mitchell? Because there's a scene where they're talking about it in the restaurant, about the disappearance of this woman, May Mitchell. And why does Aiden kill all those other women but keep Rachel alive? And for 5 years? I wish we got some insight into that. I wish we got some insight into Aiden's thought process and like why he was keeping this woman alive. So, yeah. All in all, I had some questions. I had a few things I didn't like, namely that ending. But for the most part, awesome. Great book. Great book. Well written. Oh my God, well written. Like, totally immersed you and sucked you in, like, from page 1. The only ick for me was the Emily and Aiden relationship. But that's because you have the context of knowing he's a serial killer.
My friend and I decided that we were going to go out. It was my first night that I went out dancing in Seattle. We found a babysitter for my daughter, and we went to a tavern in the U District called the Sandpiper. I noticed just a really good-looking man. He was sitting at the table by himself, and he said his name was Ted. I was flattered when he asked me to dance. Really had my eye on him all night, basically. We did dance, and then that was the end of it. So I was thinking maybe he was going to ask me again, but he didn't. And I went over and started talking to him. As a single mom, I never wanted to be bringing men home, but I was too drunk to drive, really. And I said, so will you spend the night here? And he said, yes. So I just laid down on the top of my bed without changing my clothes or anything. But he didn't try to kiss me or do any of that. When I got up in the morning, he had gotten Molly up, and he was fixing breakfast for both of us. And it just was like, oh my gosh. It just took my breath away, basically. I have not had that with anyone else, where I just right off the bat felt connected to someone. It just felt like two pieces of a puzzle coming together, just fit. And it was really quite spectacular. I thought he was very funny, and he seemed very mature, and he seemed polished, and told me that he was a law student. So I thought, as a lawyer, he's certainly going to make a nice living and have these wonderful things that he wants. And since I was new to Seattle, he could hardly wait to show me his favorite restaurants. He had a favorite Asian rug store that we went to, and look at all the Asian rugs, and just things that I thought were just endearing. My daughter had a lot of friends in our neighborhood, and so Ted was really fun with them. He'd play with them. He'd get a hose, and they'd all get their little umbrellas, and they'd be in their swimming suits, and he'd make rain for them on the lawn, and of course the kids loved it. He taught my daughter how to ride her bike. She just really took to that.
Well, it's like it is with everybody's dad teaching them to ride a bike. He ran along. Well, actually, let me start at this. He did not like it that I had training wheels on my bike. And so he took these wheels off my bike, and he would hold on to the back of it and run down the alleyway with me. And I would try to steer. And all of a sudden, he said something, and he was way at the other end of the alley. And I realized I'm riding this bike by myself, so I crashed into someone's garage promptly. I remember meeting him the first night when he came home with my mom to our house, and he read me my favorite book, which I had memorized. It was called Teddy Bear from Bumpkin Hollow. He would read along, and he would say Freddy Bear, and I'd say not Freddy Bear, Teddy Bear, and just make it ridiculous, and I would laugh, and I thought he was delightful. I mean, he gave you his entire self. And, you know, for a kid, that's everything. For somebody to pay exquisite attention to your experience is what you're looking for. And I could see he lit my mom up like a woman in love. And that just made sense. We were like a family. That's what I remember.
One of the most terrifying things about this book, and I say that with all love and respect, is that that Aiden is such a three-dimensional character. We see the good in him, we see the horrible, the detestable, but his outward facing self is such a good guy, and that is more terrifying, I think, and a flat two-dimensional mustache twirling, evil bad guy, whatever. We all know that is a fictional account, but when someone could be your next door neighbor, and what are they doing behind their door, that is terrifying. When did you was there a point in the writing where you're like, oh, I cracked the code on this guy, Was there a time where you realized, oh, he's going to be more evil than I anticipated, because this is just going to scare people too much?
It's so funny. I never thought about the I don't think I was actively trying to make the book scary.
Yeah.
Because the idea of making a novel scary or making a novel suspenseful, that sounds like an impossible task, and it sounds very overwhelming. But I did want to capture the duality that you spoke about, and I I did it, he did I did have to, sort of work to wrap my head around him and to understand how different people experienced him. And I think that's why I ended up writing this story from multiple points of view, because I think sometimes it's easier to understand someone if we view them through the prism of the people who interacted with them in life. But it's hard. It's a hard duality to hold in your brain, the good and the bad, the the meaningful good things that a character like this might have done for some people, and the despicable cruelty that they might have displayed against others. I mean, I think that's the whole reason I wrote this novel, is I needed 90,000 words to make sense of it, because it's
Yeah.
really hard to hold in your head.
Journalists who become fiction writers, is it a good feeling to take this scenario and have the control to play out the scenario to the end? Because so many times we see a real life situation, and whether you're reporting on it or you're watching the reporting, there's nothing you can do about it. You either are just conveying the facts, or you're absorbing the facts from someone else, but there's no control over it. But as a fiction writer, you're kind of the god of the world, and um, horrible things can still happen. But does being a fiction writer feel like that there's a way to sort of write the world?
Absolutely. I think you've hit the nail on the head here. A big thing for me as a journalist who started writing fiction was that I wanted to call the shots. I wanted to also, I wanted to answer questions that reality just would not provide an answer for. If you're interested in stories of crime, especially infamous stories of very, very rare types of crime, like serial killer stories, there is always a part of unknown in those stories. How many victims? Was this person a victim of this serial killer? How did they get away? Like, there's always these parts of shadow that no matter how hard we try, I don't think those answers can be found out. And I think fiction is where we get to care for these parts of ourselves that can't help but wander, and we
Right.
get to provide answers. But also, yes, I do get to, like, I know everything about this story, and you do have to follow the direction that the story wants to take, right? Like,
Sure.
but we are allowed to allow it to evolve organically and grow in a way that is very liberating compared to being tied to reality in journalism.
Right.